Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
I'm Editor-in-Chief Greg Stroud. Connecticut Public Act 490 was introduced by the legislature back in the early 1960s to preserve farmland, forest, and open space by keeping the taxes for undeveloped land in check. But recent sky-high revaluations of sometimes more than 300% have sparked outrage and warnings from farmers that the added taxes could force them to sell out.
I'm your host, Bryan Scott-Smith, and along with Greg Stroud, we're joined by two state agencies, a local state senator, and representatives from the farming and agricultural communities. Welcome to you all. The farming and agricultural industry in Connecticut is said to be worth around $4 billion annually and employs roughly 30,000 people statewide. That's according to the Connecticut Department of Agriculture. It generates significant economic activity through a diversity of products like dairy, vegetables, meat, and shellfish. And there are around 6,000 farms covering more than 400,000 acres in the state. Back in the 60s, the State General Assembly passed Public Act 490 to help protect things like farmland and other lands in the state by lowering tax on the land based on its use rather than what it was worth by way of market value. Last year, the state's Department of Agriculture and the Office of Policy and Management undertook their mandatory 5-year re-evaluation of land values. What came back, however, shocked everyone and started conversations with farmers and agencies alike, leading to some revisions of the figures. However, still unhappy, farmers and legislators took up the matter recently, and on January 19th, Governor Lamont acted to protect farmers and directed the Office of Policy and Management to reinstate the 2020 recommended land use values under PA 490, while everyone gets together to sort out the matter moving forward. Joining us today to discuss this is Bryan Hurlbert, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Martin Heft, Undersecretary of Intergovernmental Policy and Planning at OPM, Republican State Senator Heather Summers, farmer Kim Grijalva of 100 Acre Wood, Jennie Kapszukiewicz, a farmer and chair of the Plainfield Agriculture Commission, and Jerry Grabarek, a farmer and also selectman in the town of Preston. Now, as we have the two agencies responsible for the reevaluation, I'll open it up to you both. So what went wrong, Commissioner?
Thanks, Bryan, and appreciate everybody getting together to have this conversation. I think the largest problem and the most significant issue was the lack of responses that were received to generate data points to use in the land use. We opened the survey through the UConn's WIC Center in March of 2025. Looking to generate responses, and we sent it out through our weekly ag report that has a distribution of a few thousand people. We sent it out through our partner organizations. We asked about 40 different partner organizations to send out the survey through their members to generate response. As we had low responses through the course of it, we checked in both internally with SWIC and with OPM, trying to solicit ways to generate more responses. So, you know, the real core and crux of the matter is that we had very few responses. And of the responses that we did have, over half of them didn't have any of the data points that could be used to determine a value. And then through the appraisal process, some of the data points were blended. So there are a number of things that I think we can correct through the working group that the governor has convened and asked us to address to make sure that we have a better system. You know, this acknowledges that the PA 490 was designed to preserve and protect farmers, open space, and forest land. And the process is no longer able to do that. So let's fix the process. And we have an opportunity to do that through this working group and make recommendations on how to improve that.
Bryan, let me put this question to you. And if you knew you weren't happy with the data, then why even publish it in the first place? I mean, because I'm guessing ultimately between you and OPM, I mean, did you have the power to not actually have to publish that stuff? And maybe you could have gone in a different direction?
Well, I don't have the power to publish or not publish. And I'll defer to the Undersecretary on this, but my understanding is that on October 1st, the state law requires it being published. So I don't think there were options.
Okay, Martin, answer the question for us if you would then, because, I think it's important. If this could have been sort of like delayed, why not delay it?
So, yeah, I agree with, Bryan, that it was, obviously the lack of responses, in the sense of not having the full data. We did receive the same, actually equivalent to the number of surveys we did in 2020, but the information in those surveys was off. So, to answer the question on the October 1st deadline, yes, it's a statutory requirement that by October 1st, in order for your local assessors to complete their grand list by January 31st, we need to publish the numbers. So we don't have, a delay status in that or can't redo something. We did review all the numbers. We did review everything on there, and, we, put the numbers out, for that, knowing that, we did have, some limited data in some of the areas for that.
So just to clarify, did I read correctly that the response rate was less than 5%? Is that, and you're saying of those, 4.6%, that actually many of those responses were incomplete or somehow didn't have the data that you needed?
I think I can tackle that one. 44% of the respondents said that they have no cash rents. And so that they have, either a barter or a handshake relationship with the landowner. Of the respondents that said that they did do a lump sum payment with the landowner, they didn't enter any of the value as to what that payment was. So over 50% of the responses didn't have any value associated with the rental rates. And, part of what we discussed with the appraiser is that, just because somebody has a no cash rent relationship doesn't mean that the underlying land has zero value. That from an appraisal perspective, that those data points shouldn't be used for the appraisal purposes. Now, I think that's a great point for the working group to talk about. That's a policy discussion, not an appraisal discussion. I think we should have some conversation around, what the no cash numbers should mean in the calculation of the land values.
I want to bring State Senator Heather Summers here. Heather, just yesterday, the 20th of January, you held a forum in the Capitol with farmers, etc. Just give us a sense of what was coming out of that forum.
Well, I think we had great participation. We had an overflow room, and it was an opportunity for farmers to have their voices be heard. We heard from farms all across Connecticut, and they all were very colorful in what they had to say and their disappointment in the way that this was, first of all, sent to farmers, I believe, and I don't want to speak out of turn, so I will certainly allow the commissioner to correct me, that only a fifth of the farmers were mailed a postcard with a QR code, that they had to go to a survey and download a link that was very long. The response rate was really low. If you have a 2% response rate and you know that people are not filling out a survey appropriately, yet you publish this by state statute, I understand that, but there's absolutely could have been an intervention by either OPM or the commissioner's office to talk to the governor about the fact that this criteria was not reflective and was not accurately depicting how farmland was being used. And there could have been something done at that point in time to prevent the fear, the angst, and having to go through all of this to raise the awareness, and the day before, the morning of the forum, have the governor come out with not a solution, but literally like a crisis intervention, saying, okay, we're just going to hold the values from 2020 because we recognize that these are so skewed. The issue that you have now is you're pitting farmland versus forestry, because the forestry numbers, the value has declined. So if you're holding the 2020 numbers, now you have people that are holding forestry where their assessments would have perhaps declined, are now being held at a higher rate. I think that the request that the legislature has made, and this is bipartisan, this is not just, Republicans, we might have led the charge to bring it to light, but both sides are very concerned. People in the legislature, they care for, they love, they want to preserve our farms. all of us have said we need to have farmers on this working group. That was announced before the governor decided he was going to have a working group. I certainly hope that he chooses one of these folks that is on this panel today that have been in the forefront to sit on that working group to make sure that when these assessments are done, they are done appropriately and with more participation. And we're absolutely, all of us are looking at a legislative fix.
Heather, I just want to interrupt you. I just want the Commissioner Hurlbert to respond to that because I know that he has to jump off of this call, and then I want to obviously speak to the farmers. So, Bryan, response to Heather?
Yeah, I think we should be applauding the governor for taking the intervention and recognizing that the process didn't work and an opportunity to get it right. And in the governor's announcement, he did say that the working group will be comprised of farmers and other stakeholders that are directly impacted by this. So that's the directive from the governor. The Undersecretary and I have already had a conversation about how we can get this working group up and running. We understand that there's urgency and timeliness to it. We'll continue to work with legislators on different, proposals and considerations. But I think, one of the things that we heard was that farmers and stakeholders want a seat at the table about what the process will look like being forward. And the way that we've been instructed to do that is through the working group. We're going to do that diligently. We're going to honor the governor's direction and make sure that we get some recommendations, whether or not they need a legislative fix. That's to be determined by the working group. But we get the fix and can use it to move forward with. And appreciate Bryan the opportunity to join and appreciate you respecting that at a previous commitment that I've got to jump to.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time, Commissioner. Thank you for coming on this. I'm going to pass to Greg. Greg's got a quick question.
So just for listeners, can we clarify what's at stake? Like how much money are we talking about? How much added money for the median farmer or the mean sort of a landholder, in this case of farmland? Like how much extra would this revaluation, if it went forward, cost those farmers?
Let's ask one of our farmers. In fact, I think Kim actually gave a good answer fairly recently about what it could potentially cost, based on those figures before they revise them down. Kim, just give us a sense of what it would mean for you by way of cost.
Yeah. And we, with the costs that came in right before the holiday, we would have been looking at a $16,000 increase in our land taxes alone, which would have devastated us. We raise cattle here in North Stonington, and those numbers would have really put us out of business.
And Jennie, what about yourself as well? You're a farmer, but also you sit on the Commission of Ag for Plainfield. Just talk to us about figures there.
Sure. I think it's important to take a moment to recognize that PA 490 has different categories of land classifications. So you can have a tillable category, you can have pasture, you can have orchard, you can have swamp, ledge, or forestry, and now we have new maritime heritage. So each farm will be impacted differently. My personal farm is forest and tillable. The tillable categories didn't impact the same way as pasture and orchard. We do have several orchards here in town who I don't have their personal numbers for, but the orchard values went up significantly. So even just from the surface, knowing that they have, a 60-acre orchard, that would have ramifications on their taxes. So my personal farm was not impacted the same way other farms in our town and our surrounding communities were. But I think to Kim's point, there are farms that had significant increases on the October 1st release values, and then they continued to have increases on the revised values because those did continue to see increases even though there was revisions to them. So
then probably a town that we should look at, given what you were just saying, was say Glastonbury, where you have quite a bit of orchard. You have a lot of development coming in, sort of a bedroom community of Hartford. So for a town like Glastonbury, potentially these taxes could then force people that own significant orchard land, put them under more pressure to sell out to to say build housing. Of course, we need more housing as well, but is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, if I can answer that one, Greg, and thanks for asking that question. I think this affects statewide. This really isn't as much an area specific. This isn't area specific. It really just depends. Like, for instance, in North Stonington, one of the farms, the Lewis farm that came to speak at the press conference, they have 700 acres. Their farm goes back to 1791 in the same family, so it's generational farm. They're in the tillable and pasture category. They're grazing dairy, right? Dairy cows. The cost for production on dairy and cattle, any kind of livestock, has gone up significantly. The USDA reports since 2020, the cost of production for grazing cattle has gone up 170%. So in their case, this could have been a just devastating, an increase of about $100,000 on their taxes, on a farm that is already working at rates that are, when you add in inflation, lower than they were in 1985. So these rates are just, and it was good to hear from Bryan Hurlbert. That was the first time we've heard from him. And I will say, this is getting off topic, if I may, a little bit, we did not get a survey. I haven't spoken to anyone who received a survey. Yet the state has absolutely no problem getting in touch with us when they need information from us. So I find it just really interesting that there was such a struggle to get in touch with farms and get us to provide information.
Kim, thanks for that. I want to turn to Martin now. Martin's got a point he wants to make.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate, everyone's information about, what the tax implications will be. And, I just want to add a clarifying factor to that. Is as the same in a local revaluation, which happens every 5 years, you cannot take the value by your current mill rate to figure out what your taxes are going to be. Yes, it's a good estimate, but you have to a municipality has to take the entire grand list, recalculate. Most times when all assessments go up, your mill rate drops to equal, out to what you need for tax revenue. So yes, it's a good indication, but it is not fully accurate. So I did want to clarify that. And don't disagree that, yes, there is impact, with that there. Other factor is with the land use values here, a municipality does not implement those until the next revaluation. So we mentioned Glastonbury. Glastonbury doesn't reval till 2027. So they would not put these values in until their next revaluation cycle in 2027. Other towns such as Stratford, or Stafford Springs is revaluing this year. So they would have implemented this year those new values. So there is some delay in that, and, which would affect the impact. I'm not saying that it's going to lower, everything on it, but there are other factors to consider as we're looking at the full potential impact. So I did want to just clarify that.
Kim, what was your comment?
Yeah, so it was good that some towns had a reval, because can you imagine the shock in 2 years? You didn't know this, and then you get those inflated numbers. So this was really an opportunity. And when here in North Stonington, when we received that reval, like I said, it was like a shock to the heart, and we mobilized fast. Thanks to Heather Summers, we were able to get people interested in going on this, because it needed to be heard by all farmers across the state.
Jennie?
Yes, thank you very much. I am strongly encouraging all landowners, which are also farmers in certain instances, to I've created a formula for them. To Martin's point, it's an estimation, but there is a way that a landowner can determine with a decent proximity of what their anticipated taxes would be as a result of this land use valuation change. So, to say that a town would go under a potential reduction in mill rate, is possible, but is not probable in all towns and communities. So I just want to point that out. And I do have a question. Unfortunately, the commissioner has dropped the call, so maybe Martin can answer it. I did not receive a survey either, and no one I surveyed in Plainfield did. I want to know from you how many of the respondents were actual farmers.
So I don't have the official data from UConn that answers all that. We can get you that information. I can tell you, excuse me, that we extended the survey, outreach for this. It was originally done online. Emails were sent out through DOAG, through their database. It was sent out to all local assessors through their databases of anyone that they had addresses for that, they valued at PA 490. Same process we did in 2020, for getting the surveys out to everybody, worked through the Farm Bureau, as well. Obviously we can check the list. I'm, surprised that hearing a couple of you, on the call did not receive surveys, because I'm sure that you're on DOAG's list, for farmers list and everything. And I know they sent it out through their mailers I know it was included in DOAG's newsletter. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but their newsletter they sent out, it was included in that, which I'm sure a number of you are on. So, word has been out there for that, but we can get you the official numbers and everything for the UConn study. I don't have those right off the top of my head. That was all administered on the, the DOAG side.
Okay. Respectfully, I think that's data that you should have at your fingertips, especially when you're talking about a survey that is impacting landowners and farmers in their land use values, that this is why farmers are requesting a seat at the table, because we don't feel we had proper representation within that survey. You also talk a lot about digital formats. So your survey went out digitally in a lot of different methods. And when we think about the average age of farmers, not all farmers in this bracket are going to access something digitally, whether it's a smartphone, newsletter that's sent out through an email listserv. I want to be perfectly frank. Farmers are busy. They don't have time to be monitoring emails or Facebooks or the DOAG's, website. So I just hope that, we are being heard properly, and that there will be proper representation at this roundtable that will take place.
I want to bring in State Senator Summers. You had a point we had to interject earlier. So
yeah, maybe a little bit late now for my point as far as being a mayor. Going through revaluation, I hear what Mr. Heft is saying about, just because you're having this increase in your assessment does not mean that equates to an increase in tax. However, most of our municipalities are working on shoestring budgets. They've gotten reduced state help. They have contracts, whether it be the Board of Ed or their union contracts, that there's raises involved. There absolutely is a correlation with the increase in the assessment with what you're going to see in your taxes, especially for farming towns like North Stonington, where there is no commercial, there is just residential and farms. It will have a massive impact. I just have to say, from a former business person in the legislature now for a decade, this was in my opinion, a systematic failure on the side of DOAG. There is no reason that these should have been accepted as is. The commissioner has a voice. He could have gotten on the phone with the governor and avoided all of this if they had wanted to. We reached out to DOAG. We got a response that was, sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's OPM. And I think that the shifting of the buck is unacceptable. Yes, the governor stepped up at the last hour. I thanked him. And we all have thanked him for stepping in. It is an election year, and it is something that he has to do, right? Because you're going to really upset 5,000 farmers across Connecticut. I'm very happy that we're going to put a working group together to have farmers at the table. But this should have never happened. The fact that we have, agencies that are sending out postcards with QR codes to a fifth of the farmers. My farmers are, most of them, in my district, are, I would call, a advanced age. They don't have smartphones. They're working from sun up to sundown. the fact that you can get your tax bill from the state of Connecticut, or you can get something from the Department of Ag on the letterhead that you would open, but yet you're going to send them like a postcard that is something like a value mail coupon that could easily fall out of your mail. And then you're basing this whole assessment on a infinitesimally small amount of responses that maybe or maybe not filled out a survey correctly. And then to add insult to injury, assessments are being done by the lending agency that lends to farms. So there's a lot there that needs to be unpacked and it needs to be corrected. And I can tell you that many of us in the legislature are not going to stop until it is, because we want to make sure that our farms are preserved. We don't want farmers having to sell their property to build housing. We don't want farmland to have to be sold. Once it's gone, it's gone. And this really warrants attention, and I'm glad it's finally getting it.
Thank you for that, Senator. Greg's got a question.
I guess for me, it's wondering what the next steps are, really, for our listeners to sort of nail that down. And if it's in part having farmers, giving them a seat at the table, or collecting more data, and maybe to hear from Kim and Jennie or Jerry, what, so you have your seat at the table. What do you want to do with it?
Kim.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to backtrack a little bit and I'll answer that question. But, when PA 490 was enacted in 1963, the legislative intentionally placed responsibility in the hands of one person. That's the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture. And that was done for a reason. It was understood that role required someone who could really assess and understand farming, and who would uphold the vital mission of farm viability. And that farm viability just ladders up, to, farmers being able to farm and survive in farming, right? Pay themselves and their employees a living wage, to pay for the costs of production and actually reinvest in their farms so that they can grow. In the past, the survey was done as a collaboration between DOAG and the Farm Bureau. There were ag meetings and events. It included the NRCS, FSA, Farm Credit East, and direct farmer outreach. You get to the farmers how you can. And it seemed like this really moved to a digital means. What I would say if I were at the table would be, what are those other variables? And certainly we can't throw out barter and no cash leases. Those are vital. If the guy that grows my hay, it gets an increase, well, then he's not charging me $50 a bale. He's charging me $100 a bale. If the guy that's growing the corn for my animals, same thing there. It all starts to domino effect, and the commissioner of DOAG should know that and should have an eye on that and be able to say, will this really make for good farm viability? And I think the mission of these taxes and of PA 490, of the commissioner and of this group should be focused solely on farm viability and how do we make sure that is that's our core focus.
Kim, thanks for that. I just want to quickly ask Jennie and Jerry for their final comments, because we're almost out of time. So very briefly, I'm sorry to say this to both of you, but very briefly, your thoughts on this. Jennie first.
I would agree with Kim. I would also say that we need to keep it not complicated. This does not need to be this long, drawn-out process. We need to think about how we can simplify databases, simplify how farmers are reached and connected to, because if we just make this more complex, we have done nothing to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you. And Jerry?
My thought would be to base the land values on actually how much money the crop or whatever makes. I mean, that's not entered into the conversation at all.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Martin, I don't know if you've got any final comments, but as to say, we're into our last few minutes on here. We appreciate you coming on today. Obviously, a lot that's come out of this conversation, and obviously a lot to talk about going forward.
Yes, no, and I appreciate everyone's comments and thoughtfulness, into this whole process, and look forward to working with everybody. As I know, does the commissioner. We've been working this week since the governor, made his announcement, putting together, correspondence to get out to all of the different stakeholders, so we can make sure representation is there from all of the different parties and start convening this and start working forward to come up with, the proper solution. So I do look forward to working with everyone and, appreciate everyone's, comments and thoughts on this so we can come to a common solution.
Thank you for that. And Senator Summers, 30 seconds closing comment from you.
Just want everyone to know that the legislature supports farmers. We're going to stay on this. We want to make it simple, accurate, and to make sure that our farms can survive here in Connecticut. And I want to thank all the farmers that took a day out from their work. These farmers on this panel have taken way more time than they should be away from their farms to help rectify the situation. But thank you to all the farmers who came out. Your voices were heard, and we have heard them loud and clearly, and we will continue to press forward to make sure that they have an opportunity to stay here and the future generation of farming is alive and well in Connecticut.
Well, we have to bring the discussion to an end. So my thanks to Greg, Heather, Kim, Jennie, and Jerry, as well as Bryan, Hurlbert, and Martin Heft. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com and our events calendar for all the latest local news and happenings. And while you're at it, sign up and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news. It's just $20 for the year. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.